So good morning, you all. I know today is a holiday, but I decided to give this class anyway because we lost some classes, and uh, I think it's very important to finish the discussion on Michel Foucault and enter the discourse in the class, enter the content of discourse analysis. So today, in this sequence of videos, this is what I intend to do. Okay, so let's go straight to Foucault. I'll show you here the topics. And today we are going to discuss the internal procedures for discourse control and limitation. These internal procedures, they are internal to languages. They are exclusion systems that are internal to discourse, and Foucault refers to those that are exercised in language by language. So they are intrinsically linguistic, and they are the principle of commentary, authorship, and discipline. Okay. Now, what does Foucault mean by commentary? Commentary is the denial of the existence of interpretation. So it considers language as transparent, as self evident, as equal to itself. So it's like quoting someone and saying, I'm not interpreting this or I'm not fitting this in a different context. I'm just quoting someone just the way he or she said something, and I'm not interpreting. When you deny interpretation, you invest yourself as the bearer of a truth that comes from the expert. This is what we pretty much do in the academy when we quote people, when we use inverted commas to exit our subjectivity, to set us aside and take out our subjectivity of interpretation and let someone speak for you. Okay, so it's the authority that will organize meaning. A good example of these are the biblical texts in the sermon of the priest or the pastor. As we know, there are many divisions in Christianity, but when a pastor, a priest, or uh, any spiritual leader quotes the Bible, he or she does not claim to be interpreting, but to be quoting the holy texts. So, if you take another case, the discourse of a determined political leader of a party about Marxism, as we know, there are many Marxist party in Brazil and in other parts of the world, and they have different interpretations, different strategies of struggle for the what they represent as the working class. But everyone that quotes Karl Marx will not say this is what I think of Marx. They will say this is what Marx said. So these interpreters deny the fact that they are attaching their values and their own beliefs to their words in order to have their interpretation associated with the truth that they claim to speak. So they cling to the view that language is transparent, identical with itself, unambiguous, as the old Saussurian structuralist perspective, signifier signified. And as signified was supposed to be always guaranteed by the signifier. So the different Marxisms and Christianities, just as two examples that I brought to you here, ratify the presence of interpretation and the existence of the commentary. Otherwise, we would have but one Christianity, one Marxism, or one theory for any kind of ideology. Similarly, we can mention the different interpretations of a law or of a text of law from one prosecuting attorney and one defense counsel or the judge. But the law, we know, is supposed to be interpreted. If you watch the sessions in STF, you know that based on the same piece of the Constitution, this or that judge will produce different interpretation and a different conviction. Another important principle discussed by Michel Foucault is authorship, and it refers to the illusion of the origin of saying. When we speak, we believe that what we say is said by us, but in fact, what we are saying is affected by those who said before us. Remember when Foucault says that he wants to start his speech as if he entered subtly in language, but that's not the way it is. It's like the popular saying in Portuguese, pegar o bonde andando. When you enter language, there was language before you. And when you leave life, and consequently, when you leave language, there will be language after you. So we all take this bonde andando, you see? So we tend to believe that we tend to believe that we are the source of what we think, say, and do. But are we? Are not we formed? Are not we enculturated to think the way we think? We discussed that on Laraya. Don't we learn culture? So if we do learn culture, then we are taught and we learn how to think. We learn what to say in what context. We learn what to do in this or that situation. We can do certain things in a certain situation that we cannot do in another. And this is social. This is not individual. So Foucault is pointing and putting under the spotlight the fact that language is social and so is discourse. So human beings are social beings, and therefore they are a product of their social historical origin, or if you prefer, of their conditions of production, to use a Marxist term. We cannot really say that our ideas are original. They are not completely original because I can only think the way I do because I had some professors at the university, I had teachers at high school and elementary school that taught me how to read, that taught me how to speak, that taught me some rules, some grammars of society that now I fit to. So, but these ideas, on the other hand, do not belong to anyone specifically or exclusively, since they are the product of a context and interdiscourse. Now, what is interdiscourse? It's a set of discourses, pieces of discourses that get interconnected when I speak. So I can speak about democracy or the pandemic from the perspective of the economy, but also from the perspective of social issues, also from the perspective of the health system and of science. Do you see? So when Foucault speaks of a voice that speaks before him at the very beginning of his lecture, he is precisely referring to the concept of interdiscourse. That is, all the words and knowledge that circulated before and surround his words. So when he is saying he is moving other discourses, he's putting all other discourses in movement. And now I'd like to recall the words of Enyorlange that we are going to see next, that she says that discourse is language into movement, is language in movement. Discurso é língua em curso, língua em movimento. So, for example, if you get K-pop, the music style, it is nothing more than a rereading of the English and North American boy bands and girl bands from the 1990s. And if you go to boy bands and girl bands, you will probably see those yeah, yeah, yeah singers and bands from the 1960s. And if you go back, you will see that history is always coming back and moving forward in a pendular movement. Aesthetics, the same. So there is always a process of rereading. of reproducing. And when we reproduce, we don't produce exactly the same way it was, but based on it. Foucault proposes that texts, and we understand texts here as meanings and discourses, not necessarily by means of written or spoken language, but anything that bears meaning. Texts will always exist linked to other texts and discourses. This is the principle of intertextuality. So these texts say what has been said before by saying something else and or slightly different, okay? Or somehow completely different, but opposition to a certain text is also a form of calling back this original text to a dialogue. So there is a dialogic nature of language, as Mikhail Bakhtin says. So, what do Foucault and free software have in common, for example? If you know about Linux, you know that Linux is an open source platform in which your Android system, for example, is based on. What do they have in common? From the Foucaultian perspective, it would make no sense to pay copyright for any kind of intellectual production if we take it extremely, okay? Because everything that is produced by an alleged author came into being only thanks to the other anonymous authors who preceded him or her, who preceded this other author. So authorship is a problem for Foucault. It's not guaranteed that you are an author in the classical sense that you are completely original. Authors do nothing but producing new pieces of discourse out of old pieces of discourse. And when I say old, I mean those that came before. So something that is produced according to the Foucaultian thought is always based on a similar knowledge, a similar concept, a similar aesthetic, a similar ideology. Finally, the third device for controlling and distributing language that is internal to language, that is intrinsically linguistic, is the idea of discipline, which is a set of methods, approaches, and concepts that work to produce an isolated medium of action. So it's consequently rarefied action. We have talked about rarefaction, making it rare, making it accessible only to a few specialists. So discipline is precisely what we do in the academy. I can teach you linguistics. I'm out I'm authorized to teach you morphosyntax because I'm a linguist. But I'm not authorized to give a law class because I'm not someone which has a diploma in law or in economy, so I cannot talk about economics. I cannot prescribe medicine because I'm not a doctor, and so on. So, knowledge discourses are rarefied, they are distributed to only a few specialists. The others are unauthorized. So, as you see, discipline has a lot to do with authorship and authority. And I can only speak from the position of a linguist in the academy. But I can also speak from other positions in society, in my family, depending on the position which is legitimate by my members of by my family members, by members of society, if I belong to this or that social or political organization. So discipline denies the existence of the commentary, claiming to be accurate and objective, and that's precisely what science does. Science claims to be objective, based on observation, reproduction in laboratories. So, especially in the positivistic context in which Foucault was inserted, this point of view is really praised. So, discipline and these assertions of each discipline are made up of truths and gaps. And we can draw a parallel between discipline and language, and the disciplinary truths and polysemy. Let me explain this. The same way discipline brings truths, it leaves gaps. That's why we do research to try to fill in the gaps. Language is the same. As we know, language is ambiguous, language is polysemic, but language is also used for communication, and sometimes it does work. If you share the same universe of discourse, we have talked about this when I showed you the sketch of Chico Anísio, the doctor and the patient, and they share the same universe of discourse, and that's why they can make a meaning out of each other's discourse. So uh, we also have polysemy. Jokes are funny exactly because they are polysemic. They can be interpreted in this or in that way. And depending on the way you interpret it, it will be or won't be funny. So discipline works to make the means of knowledge creation and circulation scarce, still reflecting social values. So if you make the means of knowledge creation scarce, you try to preserve the status quo. You tend to preserve the status quo in society. As Foucault tells us at the very beginning of his book, that language deals with powers and dangers. So you distribute unequally powers and control dangers. Similarly, polysemy in language is delimited and shaped by language, and language reflects society. So language is distributed asymmetrically. The more the society is asymmetric in terms of power, in terms of social stratification. So we are restricted, narrow minded, and biased by discipline and our pursuit of truth, our will to truth. Remember that the will to truth can be related to the will to knowledge and will to power. Truth, knowledge is truth. Having knowledge is being the bearer of a certain truth, and bearing the truth is having power. What does discourse analysis have to do with the notion of discipline? Discourse analysis has been and still is marginalized by not being restricted to a single area of knowledge. So, discourse analysis is not only linguistics, but it's not only political science, it is not only social science, it's not only philosophy of language, it's not only a lot of disciplines, but it's all of them all together somehow. I forgot to mention psychoanalysis. So to study discourse, analysts need to draw on concepts from philosophy, psychology, linguistics, history, psychoanalysis, and sociology, without, however, being philosophers, psychoanalysts, sociologists, or those who research on medical discourse. They are not doctors. In my case, for example, I researched about the June days in Brazil, 2013, and I had to talk a lot about political science. I had to take a subject in political science, but I'm not a political scientist, and I will never have the same authority as a political scientist. On the other hand, those who do a strictly linguistic job will say that I'm not exclusively a linguist. What I do is not linguistics. You see? So that's why I talk about marginalization of discourse analysis. Those who study discourse are therefore non experts in any of the areas mentioned above and may have their authority questioned in academic realms. Just as those who study popular literature may be excluded from literary studies, that's not anymore like this because it's a tendency to include popular literature in literary studies now, but it was a process. Okay, so In the recent past, those people who studied popular literature were accused of not sticking to a canonical conception of literature. The classics, the the books, the poems, the kind of fiction that is praised by those selected and valued scholars. So with this, we finish Foucault. Okay, and now I'm going to record the next video based on Eni Orlandes' discourse analysis, uh, her book Análise do Discurso, Princípios e Procedimentos. Okay, so watch the next video, please.